On the morning of January 11, 2013, Valdosta, Georgia, a small, southern town, was about to become the center of a harrowing mystery. Kendrick Johnson, a 17-year-old high school student, was reported missing by his family. By the next day, his lifeless body would be discovered in the most bizarre and disturbing of places, rolled up inside a vertical gym mat at Lowndes High School. Kendrick was known among his peers as kind-hearted, athletic, and full of promise. With dreams of playing professional sports, he approached life with optimism and vigor. But as news of his tragic end spread, the circumstances surrounding his death would ignite a firestorm of suspicion, outrage, and a relentless pursuit of justice by his family. It was a school janitor who made the gruesome discovery. While doing his rounds in the old gym, he noticed something unusual: a pair of socks protruding from one of the large wrestling mats stored vertically against the wall. Upon inspection, he realized what he was looking at was not just forgotten clothing. Kendrick's body was inside the mat, headfirst, his feet sticking out. The scene was surreal, almost incomprehensible. Authorities moved quickly to announce a theory. They claimed Kendrick had accidentally fallen into the mat while reaching for a sneaker. Trapped and unable to call for help, they said he had suffocated. Case closed. But Kendrick's family couldn't accept that explanation. And when one begins to look closely at the details, it's hard to blame them. At 5 feet 10 inches tall and athletic, Kendrick's shoulders were broader than the 14-inch diameter opening of the mat. The idea that he would voluntarily dive headfirst into such a tight space stretched the imagination. Why would he not simply tip the mat over to retrieve the shoe? Why were there no signs of a struggle or attempt to escape? These questions pushed Kendrick's parents, Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson, to dig deeper. They demanded a second autopsy. What they uncovered was nothing short of shocking. The original autopsy, conducted by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, ruled Kendrick's death as accidental positional asphyxia. However, the independent pathologist who conducted the second autopsy came to a vastly different conclusion. He found evidence of blunt force trauma to Kendrick's neck, strongly suggesting foul play. As the Johnson family fought for answers, an even more disturbing revelation surfaced. During the second autopsy, it was discovered that Kendrick's internal organs, his heart, brain, lungs, were all missing. In their place, newspaper, a practice so outdated and disrespectful, it raised more red flags than answers. The funeral home claimed they received the body this way from the state medical examiner. The examiner's office, in turn, denied responsibility. Somewhere along the chain, Kendrick's organs had vanished, erased like clues from a crime scene. Then came the gym surveillance footage. Or rather, the conspicuous lack of it. Kendrick was seen walking into the gym. And then, nothing. Key sections of the footage were missing, glitched, or strangely unfocused. Footage from other cameras had timestamps that didn't match up, as if pieces of the puzzle had been intentionally removed. As national media picked up the story, theories emerged. Some accused fellow students of involvement, specifically, 2 brothers whose father had once worked for the FBI. Online forums and social media exploded with speculation. The Johnsons filed a $100 million wrongful death lawsuit alleging a conspiracy and cover-up. Though the case was later dismissed, the lawsuit pushed the FBI to open its own investigation. Civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump, who had become a prominent figure in cases involving racial injustice, joined the fight. "This is not just about Kendrick Johnson," Crump declared at a rally. "This is about the value of a black life in America." Despite the mounting evidence and public outrage, the road to justice was riddled with obstacles. In a rare move, Kendrick's body was exhumed twice. A third autopsy, again, cast doubt on the original findings. Additional bruises were found. The pattern of injuries painted a picture that clashed violently with the official narrative. One forensic expert described the case simply: "There's too much here that doesn't add up." With each passing year, the mystery only deepened. Was Kendrick's death truly an accident? Or was it something far more sinister? Something being deliberately hidden? The truth, it seems, is buried beneath layers of confusion, conflicting reports, and missing evidence. But for the Johnson family, the pursuit of justice has never wavered. In the wake of Kendrick Johnson's tragic discovery, his family found themselves not only mourning a beloved son but stepping into a whirlwind of controversy, suspicion, and what many believe is a carefully orchestrated cover-up. After the third autopsy revealed more troubling injuries inconsistent with an accidental death, the Johnson family felt vindicated. But justice still seemed maddeningly out of reach. It was now up to the FBI, prompted by growing public pressure and civil rights activists, to dig into the details and determine once and for all, was this a tragic accident or cold-blooded murder? In 2014, U.S. Attorney Michael Moore officially launched a federal investigation. To the Johnsons, this was the moment they had been fighting for. But progress was slow. The federal investigation dragged on for more than a year, and frustrations mounted. Then came the leaks, allegations that a white classmate and his brother may have been involved. Whispers turned into public accusations, fueled by an anonymous email, cryptic social media posts, and suspicious school records. The two students, sons of an FBI agent, quickly became the focus of a wave of conspiracy theories. But were they responsible, or just convenient scapegoats? To make matters murkier, the surveillance footage once again came under scrutiny. Independent analysts and media experts studied the timeline, pointing out critical minutes missing from multiple camera angles. Even the Department of Justice commented that the footage had significant gaps, but no clear signs of tampering could be proven, at least, not officially. Then, a bombshell. A confession letter. It emerged years after Kendrick's death, delivered anonymously to the Johnson family's attorney. In the handwritten note, the writer claimed knowledge of what happened that day. The letter described a fight in the gym, an accidental death, and a panicked cover-up. The Johnsons believed this was the smoking gun. Law enforcement was less convinced. The letter, unsigned and unverified, was investigated and ultimately dismissed as a hoax. But for many, the possibility that someone out there knew the truth refused to die. Meanwhile, protests continued. Hashtags like #JusticeForKJ trended on social media. Celebrities, activists, and influencers rallied to the cause. The Johnsons, still grieving, took their crusade to every public platform they could find. Yet time wore on. In June 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice announced it was closing the case, citing insufficient evidence to pursue federal criminal charges. For the Johnson family, this was a gut punch. Years of searching, hoping, uncovering strange details, and still no accountability. But even this wasn't the end. Jacqueline Johnson, Kendrick's mother, was unrelenting. She organized her own investigations, tracking down witnesses and pushing for local officials to reopen the case. In 2021, a new sheriff, Ashley Polk, announced he would re-examine all evidence. Over 17 boxes of materials were reviewed. More than 100 people were interviewed. But again, the final report claimed there was no proof of foul play. Still, one detail haunted the family: the autopsy photos. Independent experts noticed strange bruising patterns, suggesting Kendrick may have suffered more than one blow to the neck and jaw. These injuries didn't align with a simple fall inside a gym mat. And then, there's the rumor of surveillance being deliberately erased. A whistleblower claimed that certain students were seen near the gym shortly before Kendrick entered, and that these clips were quietly removed. The Johnson family believes the cover-up isn't just local. They believe it climbs higher, into law enforcement, school administration, and even federal branches. Whether or not that's true, it highlights the deep mistrust that exists when answers remain elusive. In the most recent twist, a private investigator working with the Johnsons unearthed a chilling new lead, a name mentioned in multiple, previously overlooked student interviews. A name that had not surfaced in any official report. But just as this name was set to be revealed, the investigator received an anonymous threat, warning him to back off. The message was simple: some things are better left buried. Now, the Johnsons and their supporters are more determined than ever. If someone is trying to bury the truth, what exactly are they hiding? Was Kendrick Johnson silenced because of what he knew, or because of who he was? The deeper you dive into the story of Kendrick Johnson, the more tangled the web becomes. 2 exhumations, 3 autopsies, multiple conflicting reports, missing surveillance footage, and now, a name. A single, overlooked name whispered in student interviews has reignited questions about what really happened that January day in 2013. And what, or who, is still hiding in the shadows. As the Johnson family pushed forward with their own private investigation, they centered in on this name. A student who was seen by several others near the old gym around the time Kendrick entered. Oddly, this individual had never been thoroughly questioned by police. More disturbingly, a few classmates claimed the student had a known grudge against Kendrick over a previous altercation. Could this be the missing link? Or another red herring? The private investigator hired by the Johnsons tried to set up an interview with the student, now an adult and living in another state. But before he could make contact, he received an anonymous email. If you talk to him, you'll end up like Kendrick. Was it an empty threat? Or a direct warning from someone tied to the truth? The PI documented the threat and passed it to authorities. But no follow-up came. No protection, no acknowledgement. Silence, again. Meanwhile, Kendrick's mother, Jacqueline Johnson, released a passionate video pleading for renewed national attention. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "We are not done. My son did not crawl into that mat and die. Somebody put him there. And somebody knows." Her message went viral. Hashtags trended. Media began circling back to the story. And with new public pressure, a whistleblower from within the school district stepped forward. This former employee claimed she had been instructed to avoid discussing anything related to the case. She recalled seeing footage during the initial days that showed Kendrick walking in the gym, followed seconds later by two other individuals. That portion of the video, she said, was later missing from what was turned over to the family and the media. The Johnsons were stunned. If true, this supported their long-held belief that surveillance footage had been selectively edited. Now came the question, could this footage be recovered? In an extraordinary move, a digital forensic expert was brought in to try and reconstruct the footage from archived servers. Bits and fragments began to appear. File logs indicating downloads and deletions, timestamps that didn't match reported school hours, and gaps that lined up perfectly with the moments Kendrick was last seen. And then, a breakthrough. An image still framed from one of the school's hallway cameras, timestamped 1:27 p.m., showed Kendrick walking toward the gym. But 2 seconds later, another camera showed a blur. Two figures entering behind him. Their faces partially obscured. The Johnsons held their breath. Could these be the individuals who followed him in? Could this finally answer the question? Who was the last to see Kendrick alive? The digital forensic team enhanced the image. Slowly, pixel by pixel. And just as one of the figures came into focus, just as a possible identity was about to be confirmed, the system shut down. Not due to a power failure. Not a glitch. The server had been remotely accessed. Someone didn't want that frame seen. The team scrambled to recover the data, but much of it was gone, erased in real time. The forensic expert turned pale. "This wasn't an accident," he said. "Someone with access didn't just cover it up. They're still watching." But what they didn't know was that a backup existed. Offline, hidden away by a cautious member of the original school tech team who had always believed something wasn't right. And now, that backup was in the hands of the Johnson family. As this digital war unfolded, something even more chilling surfaced, an old voicemail. Kendrick had left a message on a friend's phone just hours before his death. It had never been listened to until now. The friend, overwhelmed by guilt, finally decided to share it. Kendrick's voice was urgent. "Yo, something's up. I think they know about what we saw. I'll tell you later." What did Kendrick see? Was he in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or did he uncover something? Something dangerous enough to silence him forever? As the pieces converge, names, threats, footage, and now a cryptic voicemail, the storm around Kendrick Johnson's death intensifies. The truth may be closer than ever, but so is the danger. A cold wind swept across Valdosta, Georgia, as the Johnson family prepared for what could be their final fight for truth. The hidden backup footage was now in their possession. A grainy, unedited reel from the school's surveillance system, safeguarded by a quiet tech assistant who had carried the weight of silence for years. And within that footage was the beginning of the end. The Johnsons sat together in a darkened room, the glow of the monitor illuminating their tense expressions. Frame by frame, they reviewed the backup. There was Kendrick, alive and unaware, walking with purpose toward the old gym. Then, two shadows. Two figures trailed him, faces still partially obscured but more discernible than before. The enhanced clarity now revealed something new. One of them was wearing a distinctive hoodie, a local sports team logo stitched on the back. A team Kendrick had once clashed with. Jacqueline's breath caught. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the one Kendrick told me he had trouble with." The Johnsons contacted their legal team immediately. The footage was sent to experts for facial recognition and validation. What returned was unsettling. One of the individuals matched a former student whose father was a high-ranking local official. A student whose name had been carefully absent from all prior police interviews. Suddenly, everything clicked. The missing video segments. The lack of proper interrogation. The anonymous threats. The exhumation inconsistencies. Was this protection or orchestration? But the truth didn't just sit in old footage. It breathed through those who had stayed silent, and one was finally ready to speak. A former classmate, known only as Maya, contacted the Johnsons' attorney. Her voice trembled in the voicemail she left. "I think I was the last person to see Kendrick alive, but I was too scared to say anything. I didn't want to end up like him." Arrangements were made in secret. Maya met the Johnsons' team in an undisclosed location where she shared her story, one that changed everything. She had seen Kendrick walk into the gym and moments later heard shouting. She didn't go inside, but from the hallway she could make out part of the confrontation. A heated exchange. Kendrick's voice. Another voice. And then, silence, followed by hurried footsteps. "I didn't know what to do," she cried. "They told me if I said anything, I'd regret it. And I did. Every day since." Maya handed over a notebook. Inside it, scribbled entries from years prior. Memories, names, dates. One note stood out. January 10th. They said they'd make it look like an accident if I told. The notebook, the footage, and the voicemail were now converging. The Johnson family had something they never had before. A witness. A timeline. A name. And suddenly, the story wasn't just about a boy found dead in a gym mat. It was about a cover-up. A coordinated suppression from within. The Johnson legal team prepared a case to present to federal prosecutors. Pressure mounted online. Petitions surged. Investigative journalists picked up the scent again. But then, something eerie. The Johnsons' attorney received a package. No return address. Inside, a flash drive. No note. On it, one video file. A dimly lit room. A masked figure. Voice distorted. "You're digging too deep. You found the last piece. But you're not the only ones watching now." End of file. Was this a warning? A bluff? Or a sign that the truth was moments away from being buried? Again? Jacqueline Johnson wasn't deterred. "They think fear will stop us? It never has. We've come too far." As they prepared to reveal the evidence to the world in a national press conference, something unexpected happened. Maya disappeared. Gone. No trace. Her phone disconnected. Her apartment abandoned. And left behind, her notebook, torn in half. A single page still intact. On it, 3 names. One was crossed out. Another circled. And beside the third, a blood-red question mark. Who were they? And who was watching? The storm was here. The last witness had vanished. But the truth. It was now unstoppable. Silence can scream louder than words. And for years, the silence around Kendrick Johnson's death had become deafening. But now, with evidence mounting, a witness vanished, and the public demanding answers, the dam had cracked. Justice, long elusive, was closer than ever. But those protecting the truth were growing desperate. After Maya's sudden disappearance, the authorities initially brushed it off. "Adults disappear all the time," one officer reportedly told a reporter. But the Johnson family wasn't having it. Maya's notebook, now partially destroyed, was submitted to a forensic analyst. Hidden beneath the visible writing invisible ink revealed a chilling line. They meet where the water runs red. Investigators puzzled over the phrase. It sounded poetic, cryptic, until a local historian recognized the reference. During the Civil War, a ravine near Valdosta earned that nickname after a violent skirmish left the waters stained for days. Today, it was a forgotten creek near an abandoned mill. And it was there, tucked behind rusted machinery and graffiti-covered walls, that investigators found Maya's phone. Screen shattered, SIM card removed, battery drained. But inside the case was a micro SD card. Its contents included voice memos, one recorded just before her disappearance. If something happens to me, it's not an accident. One of the names in the notebook. They're watching me. I saw them with Kendrick. Suddenly, this wasn't just a cold case. It was active, ongoing, dangerous. The Johnson legal team worked swiftly. They presented their evidence to a grand jury. The video, the witness testimony, the digital forensics. The names in Maya's notebook were redacted, but the pieces painted a grim mosaic, one that federal authorities could no longer ignore. Then came the moment the Johnsons had waited for, a subpoena. The former student, identified as one of the figures in the video, was called to testify. When asked about the day Kendrick died, he answered flatly, "I don't remember." But memory, it seemed, was selective. When confronted with the still frame image of him in the hallway just seconds behind Kendrick, his expression faltered. Then his attorney intervened. "My client will be invoking his Fifth Amendment right." The media frenzy reignited. News trucks camped outside the courthouse. Kendrick Johnson's face appeared across every major outlet once again. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Justice for KJ. Hashtag Who Killed Kendrick. And yet, despite the pressure, no arrests were made. Then, a leak. A federal staffer, under condition of anonymity, contacted a major investigative podcast. In the leaked audio, a voice, allegedly from inside the prosecutor's office, admits, "There's more than enough to go forward. But politics, small-town politics. This thing goes deeper than you know." The Johnsons were crushed, but not broken. They launched a nationwide march, gathering thousands in solidarity. Hollywood actors, civil rights leaders, and influencers joined them. The case had transcended state lines. And in the midst of the movement, another break. A former school janitor stepped forward. Retired now and terminally ill, he had nothing left to lose. In an interview aired live, he admitted seeing Kendrick enter the gym, and seeing two boys follow. "I thought it was just horseplay," he said. "But then I heard a thud, and silence. When I looked back through the door crack, he wasn't moving." He had told his supervisor, but was told, quote, "Leave it alone. You didn't see nothing." That interview changed everything. The DOJ announced it was reopening the case fully, with new prosecutors. Subpoenas were reissued. New witnesses came forward. The Johnsons stood at the courthouse steps as the crowd chanted Kendrick's name. "This time," Jacqueline Johnson said, her voice steady, "we're not walking away without the truth." The reckoning had begun. But then, just as charges were expected to be filed, an unexpected twist. A second body, found in a nearby county. Same cause of death. Same Matt-style concealment. And next to it, a note. "Justice dies in darkness." Was it a copycat? Or a chilling sign that Kendrick's case was just the beginning of something bigger? The headline screamed with disbelief. Another body. Another Jim Matt. Another hauntingly familiar death. The victim, a young man named Elijah Waters, was found in an abandoned recreation center nearly 100 miles from Valdosta. Just like Kendrick Johnson, Elijah had been discovered upside down in a rolled-up wrestling mat. No signs of a struggle. Cause of death. Asphyxiation due to positional asphyxia. But something was different this time. Beside Elijah's body was a note written in red marker, "Justice dies in darkness." Law enforcement was baffled. Was it a copycat killing? A dark homage? Or something even more sinister? A pattern that had gone undetected for years? The Johnsons were devastated. But Kendrick's mother, Jacqueline, also felt a chilling confirmation. They tried to tell us it was an accident, but now it's happening again. To another family. We've been screaming the truth for years. And now maybe, just maybe, they'll finally listen. The FBI formed a joint task force to investigate the similarities between Kendrick's and Elijah's deaths. The team included forensic analysts, behavioral profilers, and digital surveillance experts. What they found shocked them. Elijah had been researching Kendrick Johnson's case. On his laptop was a document titled Parallels. It listed timestamps, autopsy comparisons, known suspects, and speculation on a group called The Circle, a rumored underground fraternity-like network operating within regional schools and institutions, known for secrecy and silence. Elijah's friends confirmed he'd grown obsessed with the Johnson case. He believed Kendrick wasn't the only one, that others had been silenced, that his own school had ties to the same power structures that shielded Kendrick's killers. And the most disturbing thing, Elijah had emailed Kendrick's family just a week before his death. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I think I found something. A pattern. I need to speak to you. I don't feel safe. He never got the chance. Now, attention turned to The Circle. Was it real? Or the ramblings of a paranoid teen? Either way, the similarities between the deaths couldn't be ignored. The task force uncovered 3 more questionable deaths over the past decade. All young black males found under mysterious circumstances in gymnasiums or sports facilities across the Southeast. None gained media traction. All had been ruled accidental or suicide. None had thorough autopsies. A secretive map began forming. Locations, dates, affiliations. And in the center of it all, a single name. A retired coach who had worked at multiple schools, including the one Kendrick attended. His name appeared in the backgrounds of every incident. Investigators brought him in for questioning. He denied all allegations, but his answers were cagey. Kids do stupid things. They climb where they shouldn't. Sometimes accidents happen. But one agent wasn't convinced. She followed his financial records and discovered multiple payments from a civic organization known as the Vanguard Foundation, an entity registered under vague educational goals but with no real operations. Then came the bombshell. Surveillance footage from Elijah's school revealed the same retired coach visiting the campus the night before Elijah disappeared. He wasn't staff. He had no reason to be there. Was he scouting, intimidating, or was he silencing? The FBI raided his home. What they found chilled them to the bone. An entire folder marked Echo Protocol. Inside were student files, gym layouts, medical records, and black and white photos of every known victim, including Kendrick Johnson. Each photo had the same 2 letters scrawled on the back, EC. Now, the narrative had shifted. This wasn't just about one murder. This was about a pattern of orchestrated silencing. A legacy of control, a hidden network within the American educational system that had operated unchecked for decades. As the Johnsons prepared for another press conference, they received a final email from Elijah's backup account. Subject: If you're reading this, I'm already gone. The email contained a single video. Elijah speaking to the camera. They can't keep getting away with it. We deserve the truth. I'm not afraid to be the spark. Kendrick was the fire. I'm just the echo. The world was watching now. And somewhere in the shadows, the circle was beginning to break. The world had its eyes fixed on the unraveling conspiracy. Elijah's final video had gone viral, igniting a storm of online activism and media pressure. And in the war room of the FBI's task force, the phrase Echo Protocol became more than just a label. It became a war cry. The files retrieved from the retired coach's home weren't just morbid trophies. They were blueprints. Diagrams of gym facilities, timestamps of janitorial rotations, lists of vulnerable students flagged by behavior or background. Some were marked with red asterisks. A few had been crossed out entirely. Kendrick Johnson's file was one of the most heavily annotated. There were surveillance photos of Kendrick, not just from school cameras, but from off-campus locations. Someone had been watching him long before the day he was found. Investigators now suspected that the Echo Protocol wasn't just about silencing individuals. It was a systematic process used to identify and suppress potential threats to an elite network. What kind of threats? Whistleblowers, outspoken students, those who didn't fall in line. The task force traced funding from the so-called Vanguard Foundation to multiple private contractors and political action committees. Some of the money even trickled into local sheriff campaigns, school board members, and educational nonprofits. It was the infrastructure of control, built on silence. But the biggest lead came from an encrypted drive found inside a false wall in the coach's garage. It contained audio files, conversations, some barely audible. One stood out. You don't ask questions. You roll the mat. You move on. The voice was familiar. After hours of analysis, it was matched with a former athletic director, still active in a major university today. The FBI made their move. He was arrested at his campus office under sealed indictment. But the arrest triggered a firestorm. Within days, a congressional oversight committee demanded answers. News networks broadcast split-screen comparisons between Kendrick's and Elijah's cases. Twitter flooded with the hashtag Echo Protocol exposed. Still, resistance remained. Internal memos from the DOJ warned the FBI to tread carefully. National security risk was mentioned more than once. How could a student's death rise to that level? Unless it was never just about the students. The deeper the task force dug, the more disturbing the reality became. The Echo Protocol had its origins in a Cold War-era program developed for campus surveillance, repurposed over the years to suppress dissent. Originally called Project Bellwether, it was meant to track student unrest in the civil rights era. But it had evolved into something darker, something autonomous. A program without oversight. One that lived on in fragments, hidden in plain sight. And Kendrick. He'd been flagged after challenging an unfair school policy. It started with a protest, a petition, a speech at a school board meeting. Then came the surveillance. The FBI knew the public needed to hear the truth. But every press leak brought retaliation. Task force members received anonymous threats. One agent's home was broken into, nothing stolen, but a note left on the pillow. Your family's next. Still, they pressed forward. Subpoenas were issued, documents unsealed. And then, another twist. A student intern working at a digital archive facility contacted the task force. She had found a VHS tape misfiled in a box labeled Holiday Events 2013. It was footage from Kendrick's school gym. It showed something never seen before. 3 individuals, 2 male students and 1 adult, entering the gym minutes after Kendrick. The adult held something in his hand. The video cut out abruptly. The intern went missing 3 days later. The Johnsons, now backed by a coalition of civil rights lawyers, filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. Depositions were scheduled. Witnesses were prepared. But as the trial neared, Kendrick's father received a package. Inside, a sealed envelope, a photograph of Kendrick smiling on the day before his death, and a handwritten note. He was never supposed to speak. The Echo Protocol had been exposed, but the truth was still being hunted, and the clock was ticking. The case had exploded into a national scandal, but there was still so much to uncover. For every piece of evidence the task force uncovered, it seemed like 2 more questions emerged. The deeper they dug into the conspiracy, the clearer it became that Kendrick Johnson's death was only one thread in a far larger and more terrifying tapestry. In the heart of Washington, D.C., the FBI convened a new task force, one that would not just look at Kendrick's case, but at the long, insidious history of surveillance and control that had been secretly shaping the lives of students across the country. This operation was dubbed Operation Bellwether. What was Bellwether? A term used for the first sheep in a flock, the one that led the way. But this was no innocent term. The project was born from the darkest days of the Cold War, when student activism posed a threat to national security. Back then, it was just about monitoring dissent, protests, riots, sit-ins. But over the decades, Bellwether had grown into something far more sinister. a nationwide system for controlling and suppressing voices that threatened the established order. Kendrick Johnson had never known that he was on their radar. He had simply spoken out against an unjust policy, something that might have been brushed aside had it not been for a well-oiled machine, one designed to quash anyone who dared to challenge the status quo. The Johnsons had always believed their son had been caught in a web of power and influence, but now they understood just how deep the web went. In a high-stakes meeting, federal agents laid out the shocking details of what they had found. The origins of Bellwether had been buried in classified files, but now, with pressure from both the public and Congress, those files were being revealed. Kendrick's death wasn't an isolated incident. It was a part of a pattern that had been meticulously orchestrated by a network of elites, whose interests extended far beyond the walls of any school. The system of control had started small. It began with monitoring students who were outspoken in their opposition to the government's stance on civil rights, racial equality, and Vietnam. But over time, it had shifted. Bellwether wasn't just tracking protesters anymore. It was identifying potential threats to the system itself. The troublemakers, the students who questioned the rules, the students who might one day rise up and demand change. As the truth began to surface, it was clear that Bellwether had far-reaching consequences. Many of the deaths that had once been written off as accidents were, in fact, part of this covert operation. Every death, every tragedy, had been engineered to send a message. Silence the voices of dissent, at all costs. In the case of Kendrick Johnson, the plan had been set into motion long before the day he was found in the gym mat. There was no accident here. This was an execution, a calculated decision by a powerful, hidden faction to rid themselves of a potential future leader who dared to question their authority. Yet, as the investigation grew, so did the backlash. Those involved in Bellwether were not just sitting back and waiting. They fought back with all the power at their disposal. Members of the task force were being threatened, harassed, and even attacked. Documents disappeared. Witnesses were silenced. The FBI's resources were stretched thin as they tried to maintain the integrity of their investigation. At the heart of the conspiracy stood a handful of powerful figures, individuals who had maneuvered through the system for decades, pulling strings, and using their influence to protect themselves and eliminate anyone who stood in their way. But now, it wasn't just about covering up one death. It was about protecting a network that had existed for generations, one that had been built on lies, silence, and the erasure of those who dared to expose the truth. With every passing day, the stakes grew higher. The FBI now knew that if they were to uncover the full extent of Bellwether, they would need to bring down not just the individuals directly responsible for Kendrick's death, but the entire system that had allowed such a thing to happen in the first place. For the Johnson family, it was a bittersweet revelation. On one hand, they now knew the truth. But the truth was dark, and it was bigger than they ever could have imagined. As the investigation into Bellwether reached its boiling point, the Johnsons received another chilling message. This one was addressed to them. Keep digging, and the truth will come for you. It always does. The war for justice had only just begun. The nation had waited for this moment, the final revelation. Kendrick Johnson's death had become more than just a case. It had become a symbol of the larger, darker forces at play. As the investigation into Bellwether and its far-reaching ramifications reached its final stages, the Johnson family knew that the truth was within their grasp. But they were also painfully aware that the truth, in all its raw, unforgiving form, might cost them everything. The FBI's task force had followed the paper trail, the financial transactions, the hidden files, and the disturbing recordings, all pointing toward a carefully constructed network of control. But despite the mounting evidence, a question remained. Could they expose the full extent of this conspiracy without risking their own lives, or worse, the lives of those they loved? Tensions had never been higher. The closer the task force came to uncovering the entire scope of the operation, the more dangerous their mission became. The officials involved in Bellwether were untouchable, entrenched in power, protected by layers of legal and political immunity. But the truth was like a fire, and it burned brightly, threatening to expose everything. The turning point came when the Johnsons, supported by a powerful group of civil rights lawyers, filed a groundbreaking federal lawsuit. It was a bold move, one that could dismantle the entire system that had kept their son's death, and the deaths of so many others, hidden in the shadows. But they knew it was the only way to force the hand of the system. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the halls of government, and it wasn't long before the media latched onto the story. News outlets began to broadcast the truth about Bellwether, about the insidious network that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Public outcry was overwhelming. Pressure mounted on lawmakers to take immediate action. Behind closed doors, the power players who had orchestrated the conspiracy scrambled to cover their tracks. They pushed back with all their might, launching legal battles, issuing threats, and attempting to discredit the Johnsons and anyone who dared to support them. But it was too late. The truth had already started to seep into the light. In a stunning twist, an anonymous whistleblower came forward, a former high-ranking member of the Bellwether program. This individual, under protection, revealed the full extent of the operation. The whistleblower detailed the methods used to manipulate students, to track their every move, to silence them when they posed a threat. The whistleblower even provided evidence that Kendrick Johnson had been one of the prime targets. The news broke like wildfire, and the public's reaction was swift and fierce. The legal and political ramifications were immediate. Investigations were launched at the highest levels of government, and some of the most powerful individuals involved in Bellwether were arrested and charged with conspiracy, manslaughter, and obstruction of justice. But the battle wasn't over. The echoes of Bellwether's dark past still loomed large. For every person brought to justice, another shadow remained, and the system that had allowed this to happen had not yet been fully dismantled. For the Johnsons, the fight for justice had been long and grueling. They had lost so much, but they had gained something too, the truth. And the truth, no matter how painful, was a victory in itself. Yet even in the wake of this monumental breakthrough, there was a lingering question. Was the exposure of Bellwether the end of the story, or was it just the beginning of something darker? In the final moments, as the Johnsons prepared for a press conference to announce the victory, a final message arrived. A chilling message that threatened to undo everything they had fought for. You may have won this round, but the game is far from over. There is always another Matt, another victim. We are everywhere. It was a warning, a reminder that even in the face of victory, there were still forces working in the shadows, ready to silence anyone who dared to challenge the system. But the Johnsons stood strong. They had faced the darkness, and they would not back down. The truth had been exposed, and with it, a new fight for justice had begun.